When you first start trading, your focus is almost always on the external: charts, strategies, indicators, price movements. You learn from others what makes a good entry, how to spot trends, or where to place your stop loss. But at some point, usually after a few losses or unexpected wins, there comes a moment when you realize technique alone isn't enough. It's not the market that beats you, it's you. Mark Douglas opens his book, The Disciplined Trader, with exactly this uncomfortable truth. The biggest challenge in trading isn't the market, it's our behavior within the market. And this is where the key to understanding the psychology of trading lies. What happens inside us when we enter a trade? Moments before, we might have spent hours analyzing, searching for patterns, checking setups. But the second the trade is live, everything changes. Our thoughts race, our pulse quickens, doubts creep in, or we get euphoric. It's as if another version of us suddenly takes the wheel, an emotional version. And it's this version that makes impulsive decisions. Douglas explains how deeply rooted emotions like fear, greed, hope, and overconfidence shape our behavior, often without us even realizing it. The cruel irony? The market doesn't care about our emotions. It's neutral. It simply reflects what is, without intention, without mercy. But our brain works differently. It craves patterns, control, and safety. When that control slips away, our limbic system kicks in, the part of the brain responsible for survival. Suddenly, a minor pullback feels like an attack. We feel stressed, want to run, take profits too early, or let a losing trade spiral even further out of fear. Maybe you know the feeling. You've got a solid strategy. You know what you should do. And yet, you click too early, or too late, or not at all. Why? Because in that moment, it's not your strategy calling the shots, it's your emotion. Douglas calls this the inner conflict between the conscious mind and unconscious behavioral patterns. And that conflict is the invisible enemy we face in the markets every single day. So what helps? The first step is awareness. It's not enough to study the markets. You have to study yourself. You have to notice when you act out of fear, when you're driven by greed, when your self-worth becomes tied to a trade's outcome, and you have to learn to let go of that attachment. Douglas is clear. You can't control the market, but you can learn to control your reaction to it. And that process starts with mindfulness. Mindfulness of what's going on inside you. What thoughts arise when a trade moves against you? What voice tries to convince you to double down, even though you know you're just trying to rescue a losing position? Discipline isn't about rigid rules. It's about understanding your own psychology. It's about being willing to observe yourself, honestly, without judgment, with curiosity. Because only when you recognize how you're sabotaging yourself can you begin to take a different path. And maybe that's the most powerful insight from this first chapter. You don't need more knowledge, you need more self-awareness. It's not the technical side that determines your success, but your ability to regulate yourself, to stay calm in the heat of the moment, to not panic after a loss, to not get carried away after a win, to remain steady, clear, disciplined. It's hard, but it's trainable. And the Disciplined Trader is a guide for how to start that journey. Because the real enemy isn't hiding in the chart, it's between your ears. But once you see it clearly, you can transform it into your greatest ally. Chapter 2, Discipline as the Key. Imagine stepping into the market like a warrior entering the battlefield. But instead of armor, you're wearing uncertainty. Instead of a shield, you're holding on to hope. And instead of a strategy, you're guided by a gut feeling. Sounds dramatic? Maybe. But that's how many traders operate, not with structure, but with emotion. And this is exactly where Mark Douglas steps in when he says, discipline is your most important tool. But what does he really mean by that? Many people associate discipline with something rigid and harsh, something forced. But the way Douglas defines it, discipline is something very different. It's not a strict rule book. It's an inner choice, the decision to act with consistency, regardless of what's happening around you or inside you. Discipline begins the moment emotions get loud, the moment the market shakes and your mind whispers, just one more trade, or maybe it'll turn around. It's in those moments that the real question is answered. Are you an impulsive trader or a disciplined one? But discipline doesn't fall from the sky. It doesn't come from a great quote or a motivational video. It's a process, and like any process, it starts with small choices, over and over again. Douglas puts it simply: discipline is doing something even when you don't feel like it. You may not want to update your trading journal, but you do it. You might want to jump into another trade, but you wait. Not because it feels good, but because you trust your plan. And that's the key. Discipline is rooted in trust, not blind trust in the market, but trust in yourself and in your process. You know your setup works. You know not every trade will be a winner. And you know that long-term success only comes from staying consistent. Douglas emphasizes that discipline is especially critical when you're facing resistance, like after a loss. Because losses aren't just numbers in the red. They trigger your nervous system. They bring up doubt, frustration, even shame. And that's when it's easy to fall back into old habits, ignoring your plan, trying to win it back. Revenge trading. A disciplined trader accepts losses as part of the game. He doesn't take them personally, but sees them as the cost of long-term success. Like a professional poker player, he knows you can't win every hand, but you can play every hand well. Discipline doesn't show up in your best moments, it shows up in your worst. When everything's going against you, when you're full of doubt, when emotions are running high, that's when you need something to hold on to. And that something is your plan. A trading plan is like a railing in a storm. It keeps you steady when the market tries to throw you off course. But even the best plan means nothing if you don't stick to it. That's why discipline is the bridge between knowledge and execution. You can know the best strategies in the world, but without discipline, you'll never apply them consistently. Douglas recommends building rituals, structures that keep you grounded, a solid morning routine, clear entry criteria for every trade, a checklist you go through before placing a position, and a journal where you reflect, not just on results, but on your behavior. Discipline is also a form of self-respect. When you take yourself seriously, your rules, your goals, your mental health, you naturally act with more discipline. You stop giving in to short-term impulses and start aligning with long-term principles. And one more thing, discipline isn't a goal, it's a state of being that needs care, like a muscle. You can train it, strengthen it, but you can also let it fade. Every moment you stick to your plan, you make it stronger. Every time you break it, you weaken it, just a little. It's like a trading account. You're either making a deposit or taking a withdrawal. That doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Mistakes happen. Even disciplined traders slip up. The difference is they notice, they reflect, and they return to their system, not with shame, but with clarity. At the end of this chapter, one image stands out. Discipline is your inner anchor. It connects your thoughts with your actions. It protects you from yourself, from your impatience, your fear, your greed, and it turns you into the kind of trader you're meant to become. Someone who doesn't just understand the market, but understands themselves. Chapter 3, the mental shift from outcome to process. In the world of trading, we're conditioned to focus on results. Profits are celebrated, losses regretted, and somehow it all seems to boil down to one question: how much did you make? This mindset is deeply ingrained, not just in trading, but in our entire performance-driven culture. But this is exactly where Mark Douglas offers a bold perspective. Success isn't about the outcome, it's about the process. What does that mean practically? It means you need to let go of short-term thinking. You have to stop treating every single trade as a test of your worth, your strategy, or your skills. Because in trading, it's not only possible, but completely normal to do everything right and still lose. A simple example: you analyze the market, find a clean setup, place your stop loss, wait patiently for the entry, everything lines up. Then, just before the trade goes your way, it stops you out. You did nothing wrong. Yet the result is negative. Why? Because the market can't be controlled. You're dealing in probabilities, not certainties. And that's exactly why focusing only on the result is so dangerous, because it leads you to evaluate your decisions based on the outcome. A loss feels like a mistake, even if your process was solid. And a win, that feels like validation, even if you acted impulsively. Douglas calls this the mental short circuit of outcome thinking. It reinforces poor habits simply because they accidentally led to a positive result. At the same time, It punishes sound processes that happen to result in a loss. So what's the way out? You have to shift your focus from outcome to method. In other words, you measure your success not by whether the trade made money, but by whether you followed your plan, whether you acted with discipline, clarity, and logic, regardless of what the market did afterward. This shift in perspective isn't easy. It goes against our instincts. Of course, a win feels better than a loss. But the sooner you realize that you can only influence the process, not the outcome, the sooner you'll start focusing on what you can actually control: your preparation, your strategy, your behavior. Douglas calls this the professional mindset. It means you think in terms of series, not single trades. You understand it's about the big picture, not about the one perfect entry. You develop statistical thinking. You accept that losses are part of the game, just like operating costs in any business. And this leads to a powerful mental state: calmness. You begin to trade more peacefully. You no longer take trades personally. You view them as part of your business model. And that changes everything. Your decisions become more rational. Your emotions step back. You become more consistent, more focused, more stable. Now, that doesn't mean results don't matter, but they're the echo, not the signal. They're what happens at the end, not what you should fixate on during the process. Because if you're always staring at the profit, you'll lose sight of what really matters: your method. A process-oriented trader doesn't ask after every trade, "Did I make money?" Instead, they ask, "Did I stick to my plan?" And if the answer is yes, then it was a good trade, no matter what the balance says. This mindset offers another major advantage: stability. If you know you did your job well, even after a loss, you stay clear-headed. You don't spiral into self-doubt. You don't seek revenge on the market. You can plan your next trade calmly because you trust your path. Douglas puts it simply: when you stop tying your self-worth to your results, you begin to truly grow. You become immune to market swings. You no longer ride the emotional roller coaster. You transform into someone who doesn't just trade, but who thinks like a pro. This mental shift from outcome to process may be the most important step in your evolution as a trader, because it doesn't just change your performance, it changes your identity. You're no longer someone chasing wins. You become someone who masters systems. And it's in that mastery that your long-term success is built. Chapter 4, Mastering Emotions. There's an image every trader knows, not necessarily as a photograph, but as a feeling. You're sitting in front of the screen. The market turns against you. Your heart starts racing. Your thoughts spiral. Your stomach tightens. Maybe it's a loss. Maybe it's a missed entry. In your mind, a storm of noise begins to drown out every strategy. And what you do next, it's not your plan that decides, it's your emotions. Emotions are the invisible forces that can change your actions in a split second. And in trading, that's particularly dangerous, because here, emotions act like amplifiers. A small setback feels like a disaster. A small gain feels like a triumph. Both can blind you. Both can drive you. And that's why emotional mastery isn't a nice to have. It's a necessity. Mark Douglas says, "You can't control the market, but you can learn to control yourself." And he doesn't mean suppression. He doesn't suggest you become some cold robot who feels nothing. Quite the opposite. He means you need to learn to recognize your emotions, to understand them, and to guide them constructively. It all starts with awareness. Many traders don't even realize when they become emotional. They only notice afterward. They close the trade too early, entered too soon, or risked twice as much as planned. Only in hindsight does it become clear that wasn't a rational decision. It was an emotional reflex. That's why Douglas recommends listening inward, especially in critical moments. What thoughts run through your mind when the market moves against you? What feelings arise when you're just about to break your plan? Can you pause, observe, and still choose consciously? A simple but powerful tool for this is the trading journal. Not just for numbers, but for your thoughts. Write down what you felt, why you acted the way you did, what triggered your choices. Over time, patterns will emerge. You'll start to see when you're vulnerable. And you'll begin to realize that many of your decisions had less to do with reality and more to do with your internal filters. Because emotions are often just memories in motion. Maybe you react to a loss not because of the loss itself, but because you were taught that mistakes are bad, or because you're afraid of being seen as a failure, or because you only feel worthy when you're winning. These are deep patterns, and they show up strongly in trading because every decision immediately produces a result. Success or failure, validation or doubt. Douglas even goes so far as to say, your trading is a mirror of your psychology. Every impulse, every break in discipline reveals something about you, your patience, your self-respect, your relationship with uncertainty. And here's where the treasure lies. If you start viewing your emotional reactions not as weaknesses, but as sources of information, then trading becomes a path to self-awareness. So what helps in practice? Douglas suggests conducting an internal check before every trade. Am I calm? Am I clear? Am I acting from conviction or reaction? And if the answer points to emotion, then don't trade. Wait, breathe, reflect, come back when you're centered again. Over time, you can build a new relationship with your emotions. You don't have to fight them. You can understand them. You'll learn that fear isn't your enemy, but a signal. That greed isn't evil, but an impulse you can interpret. And that you always have a choice, react or respond consciously. This chapter may be one of the most challenging in the book because it forces us to be honest with ourselves. It's no longer just about strategies or setups. It's about you, your inner world. The question, how do you deal with pressure, with uncertainty, with the fact that you never truly know what's coming next? Douglas says, true freedom in trading comes when you can act independently of your emotions, not emotionless, but free. Free from being paralyzed by fear, free from being driven by greed, free from tying your self-worth to every single trade. And that freedom begins inside you. It begins with self-observation, with honesty, with allowing yourself to be human, but a conscious human, a trader who knows their emotions and who has learned to dance with them instead of fighting against them. Chapter 5, the plan your shield. Entering the market without a plan is like standing in the middle of a storm. No protection, no direction, no compass. You're at the mercy of the wind. Every price fluctuation, every news headline, every sudden wave of fear or euphoria tosses you around. And at the end, you're left wondering, what just happened? Mark Douglas describes the trading plan as the central tool to protect you from this internal and external chaos. A plan isn't a cage, it's a shield. And it's not designed to defend you from the market. It's meant to protect you from yourself, from your impulses, from your sudden changes of mind, from that old habit of being swept away by the moment. So what makes a good trading plan? It's not just technical elements like entry and exit points, position sizing, or time frames. A solid plan also includes rules for your mental state, when to take breaks, how to respond to a losing streak, and how to reflect after each trade. A good plan thinks ahead. It removes decision-making from the heat of the moment when clarity is at its weakest. Why is that so important? Because the market is unpredictable. You can't know what will happen next, but you can decide ahead of time how you'll respond when it does. That's the key difference between a reactive trader and a plan-based trader. One acts on feeling, the other follows a system. Douglas emphasizes this again and again. The clearer your plan, the easier it is to stick to it. And the more consistently you follow it, the more trust you build, not just in the plan, but in yourself. That trust is priceless because it means you don't need to reevaluate everything on the fly. You follow your system. And in a world full of uncertainty, that gives you strength. Many traders make the mistake of abandoning their plan the moment something doesn't work. One loss, and they move the stop. A winning streak, and they start risking more. But this is exactly when your commitment is tested. Is your plan a real tool or just a nice idea? A good plan isn't tested in calm waters. It's tested in the storm, when you're doubting, when emotions rise, when everything in you wants to exit but your rules say, stay. And that's when your plan shows its real power. It becomes your railing when your emotions take you for a ride. But a plan is alive. It's not a static document you write once and follow blindly forever. Douglas says, your plan is a living expression of your experience. You adjust it, you improve it, you evolve, but you do it consciously, not impulsively. At the end of each trading week, you sit down and ask, what worked? Where did I deviate? Why? What did I learn? This cycle of reflection is the engine of your growth. It ensures that your plan evolves with you, that it adapts to your personality, your style, your understanding of the market. In this way, your plan becomes more than a tool. It becomes a mirror of your maturity as a trader. And there's something else. A plan brings peace. It reduces overthinking, second guessing, and the need to control everything. You know what you're doing and what you're not doing. You begin to unburden yourself. You don't need 10 indicators or 5 news feeds. You need clarity, and your plan gives you that. At the end of this chapter, one powerful image remains. A trader without a plan is like a pilot without a flight path. He might take off, but he has no idea where he's headed. A trader with a plan, on the other hand, knows what to expect, not from the market, but from himself. And that's where his true strength lies. Douglas makes it crystal clear. The market is what it is, but you decide how to face it. And your plan is your strongest tool, not to prevent losses, but to guide yourself, calmly, clearly, strategically, because the goal isn't to catch every move. The goal is to trade with reliability, composure, and consistency. And that journey begins with a plan.